Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this reply to some of the questions that you had yesterday from yesterday's first session for Plan 30091 Research Methods. What we'll do every week is that if there are questions which pop up either in the sessions or afterwards that are either emailed or passed to Razia and myself, then we'll do a little one of these and we'll reply and we'll stick it up on Blackboard so that you have a response there. So yesterday there were a few questions about visitation and the research methods module and the assessment, which we can go through, and these are the ones that Razia let me know about. So we'll go through them one by one, and hopefully they should make sense. If not, we can talk about them again in the next session. So how much literature review do I need to do? It's a perennial question, and one which I always avoid, because if we give you a set number of words to work with, then a lot of people fixate on that number rather than trying to present the best argument they can for that particular section. If you think about the length of the proposal, then there are three distinct sections. There are the literature review, the methodology, and the other sections. If you were to divide the word count by those three sections, that will give you a rough word count to work with of about 600 or 650 words, and I think that would be appropriate. But what you have to remember is that you are trying to produce a piece of work that is both concise but does outline the main arguments set out in the literature. So it shouldn't be too shallow, it shouldn't be too rapid, and therefore taking a little bit longer to add some more detailing will probably be good. But this will be reflected in a case-by-case scenario, to be honest, that all of you will be different, so those people who are doing things that might be more conceptual or abstract will actually end up having tend to have a big literature review, whereas people who are doing something that's more applied might have a broader literature review that doesn't necessarily have to be in as much depth. So we can go through this on a student by student basis, but just be aware that probably about a third of the assessment should be about this. Second question was how to develop the title of my research. This is something that we'll talk about more this coming week, but the title can be done in a number of different ways. It can be more logical and reflective of what you're actually going to do, so maybe something a bit more scientific. It can have a pun or a bit of a pithy title, so something which is a bit more fun. But what it should do is that if you are going to have a title which is not necessarily directly the thing you're doing, and a lot of academic journal papers do this, then you'd need a subheading just to explain what it is. So again, there's no right or wrong answer. If you were doing physical geography, then it would be, this is an investigation to assess X in condition Y. But with what we do, it might be the name of the theme or name of a location or an issue, and then a subheading to explain what you're going to do about it. But again, there's no right and wrong answer, and the title doesn't need to really be developed until towards the end, because that can change, and it is quite malleable compared to other things. Third question is it essential to collect primary data? In one word, no, but we would tend to encourage it, because a dissertation is a piece of work that's your work. Unless you're only going to do secondary analysis and secondary statistics, then there will tend to be a component of primary research and data collection. One thing that we would say is that being able to construct a methodology that involves primary data to go through the process of reflection on what can and can't work and how you do it in terms of things like sampling or numbers is a positive, and they're skills that you can take out into the real world and different jobs. So whilst it's not a requirement to do primary data collection, we would strongly recommend it in most cases. Fourthly, what is grey literature? I'm surprised this came up. Grey literature is basically not academic journals or books. It is those other pieces of material, such as reports by government, practitioner materials, the media, where there is a conversation going on which is not necessarily peer-reviewed and academic in the way that it might otherwise be. So things by the UK government or Manchester City Council or the Environment Agency or other non-governmental organisations are things that will be classed as grey literature. And the fifth point relates back to the third one about data collection. If if you're going to use secondary data, which I think is what the question asks for, that is fine, as long as your analysis is something new. However, you have to be very careful about the nature of the data collected, what the form of analysis and the reasons behind that are, to ensure that the data is being used specifically for your project. So you can't just reanalyze somebody else's data, you have to actually have a reason to do so. If you've been working on a project and there's a data set there, you then have to sort of, again, show how it's different to what will be happening previously. One thing to remember here is that any data collected, and I think this came up during the session, any data collected has to be done within the ethical frameworks of the dissertation and the research methods modules. So anything that you've already collected is not allowed to be used because it does not have ethical approval for it. And we can go through that more specifically with individual students if needs be, but pretty much any data that you collect has to be collected once you've gained ethical approval. Otherwise, the data can't be used in the dissertation, and if it is, it can be classed as invalid, and therefore you may fail dissertation. Next question is about supervision. Once the proposals have been submitted, so we have the two forms of assessment, the formative and the summative. With the initial draft one, that will allow Razia and I to have a quick look about what you might be thinking about doing and start to identify who may be possible to supervise it. Then once you submit the final version, we will mark it, give you the feedback, and then we will allocate a supervisor. We will then email all the PEM staff and say these are the allocations, and they will be told, and then you can email them and arrange the meetings. The way in which supervision works is outlined in the dissertation handbook, which is available on Blackboard. And the final question about changing topic. This is difficult because it again relates to the ethical approval system. If there are minor tweaks to the topic in terms of maybe the type of method or the participant sample number, that sort of thing, we might be able to accommodate that. But if you move from one topic to something completely different, we would normally say no, because you would have to go through the exact, because the work you'd been graded on would be about a different topic. You would then have to go through another form of ethical approval, and it generally isn't permitted. So if in doubt, get the topic right, and if it is something that has slight variation, then maybe give it a slightly varied or less focused title, which allows you to change or modify, evolve it over the course of dissertation. But if you submit a completely different dissertation to what you had ethical approval for, again it might be failed because it doesn't conform to the university's regulations. Okay, so hopefully that's answered some of the questions. If you have any more, please let us know. But for the coming week, there's some things to think about before the session on Monday. So firstly, the topic. Again, as we said previously, this is your dissertation. It's down to you to come up with the ideas. So you need to start thinking about what the topic is, what you want to do, and why. So why is this thing interesting? What is the gap in the literature or in the practice that you'd like to try and address? And that will be the thing that we'll use as part of the basis for discussions in next week and the week after. Secondly, you need to think about the title, which has already been mentioned. So is it something practical and logical, it says what it is? Is it something pithy or silly or interesting? So is it a pun? Is it a play on words? Is it a quote? Is it something like that? So you need to think about, are you doing something that says what it sees? So something they directed, or something which you might need a subheading for. Again, this isn't really that important until towards the end of the submission, but it's things to think about. We'll also be talking about different methods and about which ones might be appropriate. We have two sessions later in the semester, one with Nuno looking at quantitative methods, and then one with Razia and I looking at qualitative ones. What we would expect is that most students will have a mixed methods approach. That doesn't mean a mixture of qualitative and quantitative, although it can. It tends to mean a mixture of different methods from within the social sciences. So it might be interviews, and questionnaires, or site observations, or policy analysis, or there might be some data crunching there as well. So the more you think about these things now, the easier it will be to help structure and guide you through the process of developing the proposal. And finally, we'll talk a bit about logistics, practicalities of conducting research, and ethical considerations. And here the main thing to think about is it doable? Can you achieve the amount of work or research or data collection that you need to do or proposing to do within the time frame that we have? Because if you think logically about it, you'll potentially start to do any primary data collection towards the end of the semester, potentially over Christmas, and so the window for doing that data collection is relatively small. So you need to think about the who's, the what's, the where's, the when's, the why's, and particularly if you're going to talk to people or try and get information from people, you need to work out how long it might take to develop and cultivate those contacts, and how long it might take to organise and to undertake interviews or research questionnaires. This leads into the practicalities, so when and where and how are you going to do it? Does it involve going out and doing field work? Does it involve finding documents to review? Are these available online, or do you have to go and get them in person from people? And so there's lots of quite small technical things which need to be considered before you actually start. And again, we'll go through some of these next week, and these will be recurring themes throughout the module itself. And finally, there's the ethical considerations. So if you are going to be collecting primary data with people, then you have to get ethical approval, and that is regardless of what type of research you're doing. If you are involving people in any way, there will need to be ethical approval. We also need to sort of make it clear that research involving vulnerable groups, that might be people who have reduced mental capabilities to give consent, older people, or people under 16, so children, you will not get ethical consent to work with those, because that will need to go to a faculty or even a university level ethical approval board, and you don't have the time to get that approved. That can take up to 6 months. So think carefully about who you might be dealing with, and invariably with our subjects, it's people who work in local government, people working in consultancies or developers, or the environment sector, maybe the public, maybe academics as well. So there's lots of other options, but you'll need to think carefully about who the people are you might be researching, why it might be important to talk to them or investigate them, and how you're going to do it. Of course, if you're going to do solely secondary data analysis, this becomes almost irrelevant, but it's things to think about now, because this link between the methods and the way in which we sample and the practicalities of doing research is quite important. Okay, I hope you found this useful, and Lazia and I will see you on Monday. If you have any questions, please just either let one of us know, or if not, we'll see you then.